I have to disagree strongly with the chairperson of the Climate Committee about the opposition's position on this, that it is way too harsh and unfair on the government. Quite the opposite. It's not harsh enough. What is going on here with this bill is really, it's manipulation of the highest order to avoid paying, to make it look like there's going to be a tax on the profits and the gains of the recent months, but to help them to avoid paying it. And when this bill was discussed at the Climate and Environment Committee, I had concerns, and I expressed them then, about how it would operate and whether it was the ideal mechanism to deal with the energy crisis and the price gouging and the profiteering that we've seen. And these concerns still stand, Minister, and are actually worse in this finished bill. And I have a few questions before I make my political points on some of the measures in the bill and measures that are absent from it. First of all, when we discussed the heads of bill at the Climate Committee, there was an attempt to cover those sectors not engaged in the fossil fuel refining or selling, etc., as distinct from renewables. And the idea was that a cap on market revenues would be introduced to capture the profits of all companies, including the renewable energy companies. So where is that proposal? Or will there be a different piece of legislation to capture the profits of the renewable energy companies as distinct from the fossil fuel companies? I'll listen to your answer afterwards. Or have we given up on that? But I'm sure you do have an answer for it. And secondly, the Act covers the activities in the fossil fuel sector, such as production or refining of natural gas, coal, petroleum, manufacture of coke or urban products carried on in the state. And again, I have a question. Does this sufficiently cover and capture all of the companies who reaped windfall profits during the crisis and continue to do so? But my main alarm concern remains the same. The tax will be on profits above 120% of average profits in the years before the bill, and the tax will be 75% of those profits. My question is why? Why are they being allowed to retain 120%? And even then, is the rate still only set at 75% of the profits? Why is that happening? More worryingly, the scope in the bill for opt-out clauses and loopholes. And let's be honest, we can guess that there'll be a small army of consultants and tax advisors as we speak, working away at methods to avoid paying this tax. And so I think the estimates provided by the civil servants may be very optimistic, considering the scope that the bill gives for an inventive accountant, or sets of inventive accountants. First, any losses for the previous 5 years can be discounted. And secondly, the memo capital expenditure on the acquisition or construction of allowable tangible assets will be deductible in full. I suspect that this will be a horse and carriage driven through the amount that may be payable by these companies. And lastly, in the heads of the bill, there was a discussion that all monies accumulated should be spent in defined ways on renewable energy or to ease customers' bills. That's not here. And from what I can see, and again I want you to ask you to speak on this, that all revenues collected seem to be just under the control of revenue. Now I want to address some wider political issues. By definition, a windfall tax is a one-off and temporary measure. It can't address the systemic problems that have led to this excessive profiteering. Since the crisis, like every TD here, I have been inundated with people scared, terrified of their gas and electricity bills, making the choices between eating or heating. And the story we are all told is because of Putin and that brutal invasion of Ukraine. But the reality, I think, is different. And again, I want to disagree with the previous government speaker. Yes, the illegal war did spark the crisis, but the flames caught because of the very way that the European Union have built and developed a liberalised market. In Ireland, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael changed the remit of the ESB and facilitated competition in the energy provision. So even before this crisis, we could see that the promises of liberalisation and privatisation were pipe dreams. That crisis revealed all of that for us to see. Last May, the Irish Independent reported that Irish prices were 26% higher than the EU average in energy. According to the report from Charlie Weston, electricity prices in Ireland, and I quote, are 26% above the EU average and are the fourth most expensive in the EU bloc. Only Germany, Denmark and Belgium are more expensive. And figures from Eurostat show us that in April, shows that the electricity price in Ireland are a staggering 48% above the EU average, only behind Denmark and Belgium. That's from the Eurostat records. This is far from the rhetoric that Thatcher and Reagan made us all dream of, correcting all the wrongs and delivering value for everyone. This neoliberal revolution was meant to herald an era of dynamic energy companies reducing prices, investing in the state and investing in state-of-the-art technology. But as with all neoliberal promises, what we got was very different. We got a plethora of competing firms, price rises, large profits for some, and an attack on the traditional unionised workforces in companies right across this country and beyond. Recent studies have also showed us that the creation of a market in the energy sector has also made it much more difficult, and we've evidence again of that today with the announcement that there is to be a fine or a case taken against the Irish state by the Lansdowne Oil and Gas Company for the failure to allow the development of Barry Rowe. I think that's a really good example of why liberalisation has made it much, much more difficult for us as a state to take the measures we need to deal with the climate crisis, and that investment in renewables has been less than it would have been with a nationalised state owned and controlled by a nationalised energy company. And I just want to plug here, and I'll give you a preview of it if you want, Minister. This is a document that People Before Profit have just produced. It's called People's Power, the Case for Nationalising the Energy System. It's put together very well, very coherently, and it basically argues for returning the not-for-profit mandate to the ESB to allow that company to flourish and become a nationalised energy company in the renewable sector. And after all, the Ukraine crisis has shown us that ultimately, when we're faced with a crisis, private companies will do what comes naturally. They will use that crisis to advance their own bottom line, to amass profits. Where we had heard it said so many times, you never waste a good crisis. And we have seen widespread profiteering in energy, as well as in other sectors, in food and retail, etc. But don't take my word for it, or indeed the word of anybody in the opposition, but the IMF this Monday told us rising corporate profits account for half the increase in Europe's inflation over the past 2 years, as companies increase prices by more than spiking costs of imported energy. So this is an opportunity for profits to be gouged, to be made to rise, and our answer to it is pretty poor. The IMF are no left-wing think tank. They are simply confirming the reality of how markets in general work and how the energy market itself works. And bizarrely, the profiteering of renewable companies was built into how this Byzantine market was created. The guarantee that they could charge whatever was the highest fuel cost was given on any day, regardless of what they paid themselves or what it cost to produce the renewable energy. The necessity for a windfall tax is clear, and it's due in large part to the very way that the European Union and the Irish governments have created that liberalised energy market sector. The other thing that liberalisation did, of course, was to increase the numbers who've suffered from energy poverty. And this has been a feature of the globally driven market within the energy systems. It reached gigantic proportions now with this crisis. According to CRU, and you will know this, Minister, over 400,000, almost 500,000 households are in energy arrears, in energy bills arrears in this state. And the once-off help with the electricity bills hasn't ended or addressed that crisis in energy poverty in Irish households. And continuing with a market-based approach to energy guarantees that it will remain a feature even after this crisis passes, and even despite your claims after the war in Ukraine ends. This bill we are dealing with today effectively is an admission of failure. It's failure of the political ideology that allowed the profiteering of energy sector in the first place. It's failure of the state, and it's failure of the regulators to stop it, and it's a failure to tackle aggressively the philosophy that has made this possible. We have not seen the last of price gouging and profiteering from the energy sector, and the bill in that sense is little more now than a plaster on a gaping wound, and I do not think it's fit for purpose, and it needs a huge amount of amending.